Welcome to the Albuquerque Journal's Fast Break High School Basketball Show with your host, James Yodice. This show is sponsored by Western New Mexico University.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Fast Break, the Albuquerque Journal's high school basketball podcast. I am James Yodice. I'm the high school sports editor at the Albuquerque Journal. I believe this is episode 5 of the season. We are into the Albuquerque Metro Championships this week. We'll talk about that a little bit. I've got a guest with me here in studio. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. We're going to talk mostly with my guest today, but before we do that, real quick, I just wanted to mention that the Metro Tournament began as we sit down and record this podcast. It's Wednesday afternoon, so we are into the quarterfinals tonight. The first round was played on Tuesday night, 8 girls games, 8 boys games. So we've got quarterfinal games being played Wednesday. We'll have semifinals on Friday, championship games on Saturday at Highland High School, boys at 4 o'clock, girls at 6. Before I get to my guest, I would say I was surprised by the lack of close competitive games, especially in the boys tournament last night. I think of the 8 games, only one of them was decided by single digits, and that was Atrisco Heritage and Hope. All of the rest, the other 7, were all decided by at least 10 points. And the game that on paper should have been the best game turned out to be the worst by far, which was Cleveland and Santa Fe. These are 2 teams ranked in the top 7 by the coaches. And Cleveland beat Santa Fe 79-46. And these 2 teams played a close game a month ago, which was 80-74. So I would have expected that game to be the best of the 8, and it turned out by far to be the worst of the 8. So most of the teams that I expected to advance did. As I said, we got quarterfinals tonight. On the girls' side, not a lot of close games there either. Matter of fact, probably a few more one-sided games than we had with the boys. But there were no real upsets of note in the first round of either the boys' tournament or the girls' tournament. So all the teams that have been performing well so far this season won on Tuesday night. So we should have some better action tonight, I think, Wednesday night, here in the quarterfinal round. So I'll look forward to that. I'm going to get out and watch a little bit of basketball tonight. I'm not sure which game I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to get out and watch somebody tonight. One of the teams that is remaining in the girls' field is the Hobbs Eagles. My guest today is the head coach of Hobbs, Joe Carpenter. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Hobbs, of course, is the defending 5A state champion. Hobbs is the defending Metro champion. Albuquerque Public Schools before last season, made the decision that they wanted to give some local teams a chance to opt out of the Metro tournament if they wanted, and some of them were getting really beat up in this tournament. 4 games in 5 days. The teams that were struggling to compete were really getting beat up playing 4 games in 5 days, and they couldn't stay on the floor with the teams they were playing. So they opened it up, and they created a new wrinkle in which they invited teams from outside the Metro area. In the boys' case, that would be Santa Fe and Hobbs, and on the girls' side, that would be Gallup and Hobbs. So I guess before, and we're going to talk about a few different things, but going back, can you tell me how this pairing came? Did Albuquerque Public Schools reach out to Hobbs and ask if you'd be interested in coming to this tournament? How did that work out? And did you feel like this is something you wanted to jump on?
Yes, I think Adrian Ortega has a good grasp of good competitiveness, and I think that's what he wanted. And when he let our athletic director Brenda Wilson know that they were going to open it up. Obviously, she jumped on that situation because it's difficult for us to schedule games down south. And so this is kind of 4 games out of 26. It's quite a bit of your schedule. And so we were excited about it. And so it worked out. And I think he has a good idea what's going on.
Yeah, and I bring this up because when you come up for the state tournament, Hobbs usually is here for the entire week. So you come up on Monday, play a game on Tuesday, then play Thursday, then play Saturday, and you spend a whole week. So you have to invest another week to come up to this tournament. How does this work academically? I don't know if Hobbs is still on break or not. APS just went back to school today, the 10th. Is Hobbs still on a break, or do you have to find that balance for your kids where they've got to be out for a whole week coming off a holiday break anyway?
Yeah, it is a concern, we've talked about that, but we started back to school today ourselves. So they will be missing the first 3 days of school. But our kids are student athletes and student first. And so they recognize what they have to do. And so matter of fact, I know that they're on the computers right now. So they're already checking their Google Classrooms and trying to get ahead and keep up with what's going on.
So as we're sitting here today, you played West Mesa last night, beat them 75-33. You're going to be playing Cleveland tonight at 7:15 in the quarterfinals. This team, I believe, has won 14 in a row since you lost to Monterey High from Lubbock to start the year. And as I was looking at some rosters the other night, and you and I talked before the season, but as I was looking at the Max Preps roster on Monday night, there was no seniors listed. Is that correct? There's not a senior on this team? There was none on the roster that was listed, but that sometimes that doesn't always reflect an updated roster.
Yeah, James, we actually have a senior, but she's our manager.
Okay.
So no, but we don't have a senior right now, and so we got some not inexperienced, but we got some young kids.
And you certainly now how many starters are back from last year? I want to say 3 or 4, yes?
Well, pretty much all 5.
All 5, okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this group. You've got girls that are experienced, and it might be a young team. If you looked at the roster, if you looked at this team on roster and didn't know anything about Hobbs, you'd say, well, maybe this team's not ready yet. However, girls like Kendall Cunningham, Brett Clay, so on, and several others who I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But you've got a lot of veterans on this team, and they all were part of a state championship run last year. So this is far from a young team, but every season has its own dynamic. Why don't you take me through? We're about halfway through this year. Take me through this group, what you're seeing from them. You guys are ranked number 1 by the coaches and by Max Preps as well. So what are you seeing from this group so far?
Well, I think this year, Coach Seiss and myself, we sat down at the end of the year and we needed to challenge them in different ways. So I asked him to start looking into some kind of system where we could play a little faster. And so we kind of adopted a little bit of the race in space where there's a lot more spacing, a lot more where we can play a little faster. And then we've kind of molded it into our own with our personnel. And so we're averaging probably around 75, 78 points a game, something like that.
Which puts an enormous amount of pressure on anybody you play to keep up.
Yes, and it takes a lot of pressure off the coach too, because as a coach, it's hard to play, 9, 10 kids, and they're all good players, and to find minutes for them. So we thought we needed to play faster this year so we could, get more kids involved, get more shots, more everything. And it's good, but it's also a negative because we're only playing a half a game sometimes because of the running clock.
So, I think any coach or any program would always want to try and find a balance. You want to have some veterans on your team to guide the younger kids, and have some seniors on the floor to guide you through the tough times to go with the freshmen or maybe even the 8th graders. You do not have that, but that's not an issue. And I'm just wondering, did it just sort of evolve this way that this team is so young?
No, it went through tons of injuries. We had some move outs. I'll just say it. Anaya Joseph, she should still be on this team.
She left to San Antonio.
Yes.
Right.
And then Wisdom Anthony would have been a leader the last 2 years that could have helped mentor. It just, things haven't fallen into place, I would say, James. And so they haven't gotten the mentorship that I wish this group would have had. But they've overcome a lot of that, and they've been sponges, and they've been learners, and so I think they've done a good job of that throughout the last couple of years.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you specifically about last season. You win the state title. Wisdom Anthony, who was a fantastic guard for you, had knee injuries both her junior year and senior year.
Yes.
You mentioned Anaya Joseph moved to Texas. Mm-hmm. You won, and you had another girl that was suspended for the final.
Yes.
Because of something that happened in the semifinal game against La Cueva. And you still went out and won a state championship. And I'm wondering if you think about your time at Hobbs, and this was your, I think, 3rd title with Hobbs.
Yes.
If you think about all 3 of them, or maybe even any of the 6 in a row that you've been to in the finals, how particularly gratifying last season must have been, given what you had to overcome. And you think, and you almost have to ask yourself, what would this team have looked like with Anaya Joseph and Wisdom Anthony on this roster? You were already a dominant team.
Yeah, it would have been a lot of fun to coach, and but we've never been a team that makes excuses. This is kind of the first time I've ever talked about that you've actually, asked me questions media-wise, because we've always been next man up. We don't use excuses like we don't have her and we don't have her. We just expect the next one to get the job done. And I'll give a couple kudos and shout outs. You know, we replaced a 6-foot post last year in the state championship with a 5'3" guard.
We're talking about Kendall
Cunningham.
Right.
And so we thought about it as a coaching staff, and we decided to go with a smaller kid and get faster. And I told you we were going to press Volcano Vista, and that's what we did for 4 quarters.
Right.
We got smaller, so we got faster, and that's what we did. And the next man up happened to be Aliana Armitage. She started 1 game in Hobbs history.
I think you mentioned that in the post game after the game.
Even this year, she's only started 1 game in Hobbs history, and it was a state championship game. And she's a great player. She plays hard for us. She's a great 6th man to have off the bench, and I'm very pleased with her.
A championship like this, I think, though, also speaks to the health of a program. Mm-hmm. You have a program that's been going unbelievably well, 6 state championship game appearances in a row, 3 state titles. Great programs are able to segue and adapt and pivot when they need to.
Yeah, we definitely have some more depth that a lot of people don't have, you know, and so I think that helps a lot. But depth-wise, we've had that ability. We just have a lot of confidence in our kids, and we try to put them in a system where it's not, how do you say this, real difficult to play in. So it's worked out that way.
Hey, one thing I wanted to ask you while you were here, you know, and I've been doing this job a long time, 38 years roughly. As I grew up as a young reporter in this building, mm-hmm. it was always the Hobbs boys mm-hmm. that commanded your attention. I even remember as a young Cub reporter being sent out to cover a Ralph Tasker game when I was just a kid. They had missed the state tournament 1 year, which was such a big news event. And this is back when we only had 8 teams in the field. There were only 4 classes, only 8 teams, 2 teams from each district. So Hobbs got back to the state tournament. This would have been about 1986, I think. And I think I was only like 19 at the time. And they sent me out to cover. I think Hobbs was playing Farmington with Marv Sanders in the state tournament. Hobbs was coming back, and Hobbs lost the game because Farmington won state that year with Rob Robbins. Farmington, I think, beat Hobbs. I think it was a quarterfinal game. Yeah, there were no first-round games, anything like that, so it was just quarterfinals. And I was warned. I'm like, look, you know, you should try and talk to Coach Tasker. And this is back before the NMAA stepped in and started bringing coaches and players into a media room. Back then, you just kind of had to wait outside the locker rooms. And I had met Coach Tasker once, and he was very nice to me. But I was warned, like, look, if Hobbs loses, Coach Tasker is not going to talk to you. He'll be polite, but he won't talk to you. And I thought, well, I'll just give it a shot. And I was terrified waiting outside the locker room. I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to say to this man. And I introduced myself, and I said, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about the game. And he said, no, thank you. And he just kind of moved on his way. But it was one of those no thank yous that, like, get away from me, no thank yous. You know, because he was, you know, like all great coaches, very competitive. And mm-hmm. when you lose a game in the pit, you know, it's tough. It's tough when your season ends. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is Hobbs boys basketball has always been really one of the featured programs, not just in the state, but in the region. You know, people talk about Hobbs America. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just a brand. The Hobbs girls now, over the last half dozen years, have become that same brand. And I'm wondering, maybe you can speak to this. How has the vibe changed in Hobbs? I don't get down to Hobbs hardly ever. Has the vibe changed between how the town follows and reacts to the boys versus how it reacts and follows the girls?
Yeah. I mean, I think we got a lot more following with the girls, and I don't want to take that away from the boys because our boys, they work hard. I see all the effort and the energy that the coaches put in, Ronald Ross and Shelby Reeves, and they do a tremendous job. They spend a lot of time and hours in it. It just hasn't translated in wins right now. And so I can see where you're going with this. We're kind of like the rock stars, and we're winning, and we're 14-1 or whatever we are.
And I think I asked because I don't get a chance to attend the home games, so I don't know how the crowds are, boys versus girls. You know, I still remember the 2008 championship game here. Hobbs played Clovis, and I wasn't covering the game, but I was going to attend the game. And I showed up about 15 minutes before tip-off, and I couldn't even find a parking space. And when I came into the pit was completely full, 15,000 people, all of Clovis, all of Hobbs came in, and of course those two already have such a great rivalry, but I was shocked at how many people had taken the time to make the trip up here, which proved just how much of a of a brand name Hobbs boys basketball has been. And that's why I think I was asking about how the vibe is right now at Tasker Arena when you're on the floor versus when the boys are on the floor.
Well, it's a real positive vibe for us, and as far as the boys, I can't really say how they feel, but I do know this. I know that the bottom has been packed at most of our games, and especially when we're playing an opponent that has a chance, like when Volcano came, that has a chance to beat us. They want to see good basketball. And so they just love basketball in Hobbs. There's a lot, quite a bit of people that love to come and see that. And we also put out a product where the kids are playing really fast and scoring a lot of points. And right now the boys are a work in progress right now. But I wouldn't say that their fan base is against them or they've come over to our side. I just think that they're kind of like just waiting.
And I'm not suggesting that at all.
Right.
I was just wondering how the vibe was with both genders right now.
Yeah, I think that it's on its way up though.
Okay.
Definitely. And as far as packing it in and standing room only, just give us about a year or two, and I think you might enjoy the boys and the girls. And I invite you, James Yodice, to come on down and cover a game and hang out with Joe Carpenter.
It has been a while since I've been to Tasker Arena, I think 3 times, but it's been a very long time since I have been there. And it's so unique. The benches along the baselines, which is such a unique look, and I liken it very much to Bulldog Bowl in Artesia for football. It's one of those places you should go if you can. Now, of course, it's not an easy trip from here. Even it's 330 miles just from where we're sitting. But it's one of those places that's worthwhile if you find the right game and the right environment. It's an unbelievably electric environment. How is it coaching there? I always imagine it's just such a nurturing place to coach.
It's a dream come true. I mean, to end my career in Hobbs where I started it, it's just amazing. I mean, I was in Roswell for 16 years. But the thing is that they love basketball. We come out with 25 little mascots running on the court. We have the Taskervich band. We got cheerleaders that are state champions, cheering for you on the sidelines. If you look down on the baseline, you got your athletic directors all sitting there. You got your principals sitting there. You got board members sitting there. They're super supportive of everything you do in Hobbs. It's just amazing. And not that Roswell didn't have that, but not like at the Hobbs level.
It's apples and oranges.
It is apples and oranges. You're absolutely correct.
One thing I've never asked you about is your origin in basketball as a player and how you got the itch to coach. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I just didn't get hired to be the softball coach, and then I didn't get hired to be a baseball coach.
Where was this?
In Hobbs.
In Hobbs. Okay.
Yeah.
You went to Hobbs High School?
No. I went to El Paso Hanks.
Okay.
And then a guy by the name of, I don't know if you know this young man. He was young back when he recruited me. His name was Ray Birmingham.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. So Ray recruited me to Hobbs to play baseball there. And so then that's why when we do play at the pit, sometimes you'll see Ray pop up and he still calls me kid. So I enjoy our conversations. But, I was up for this job, that job, and just didn't get it. And next thing you know, I was doing freshman boys basketball at Houston.
But you were a baseball player.
Yeah, I was a baseball player.
Not a basketball player.
No.
Okay.
Well, I did play basketball in high school, but I wasn't a college basketball player. And so it kind of, you're going to do this and that. So I was working under Coach Tasker, and then a guy by the name of Kent Williams wanted to take over the girls. And him and Shelby Reeves walk in one day and said, "Hey, we want you to come with us. You're a good middle school coach. We want to see how you can do with us." So I said, "All right, let's do it." And I said, "But are we ever going to do the boys?" "Yes, when Coach Tasker gets out, we're going to do the boys." And I'm like, "Okay, we got to prove that we can do it with the girls first, so admin will hire us."
Education and training at Western New Mexico University is accessible from every corner of the land of enchantment, providing limitless opportunities toward success for more than a century. And now, through the New Mexico Opportunity Scholarship, tuition and fees are covered for anyone looking to start or start over. Along with free tuition, books are always included for every WNMU student. Assuring your only worry is how far you can actually go. Lift off toward your future and endless potential at WNMU today.
But let's rewind for a second. How did you get into coaching basketball to begin with? What was it? What was it that got you interested? Was it just a job that was available? Were you actually actively interested in coaching basketball?
No, I wasn't actively interested in coaching, but I wanted to coach baseball, and there was no baseball jobs open. And then I started helping Denise Sifford at the time. Her name's Denise Sims with softball. And the head job came available, and they were like, nope, you're going to stay in basketball. And I'm like, well, why? So I didn't think I was a very good basketball coach. I really didn't. I love baseball. I love softball. I loved those sports. I didn't love basketball. And then all of a sudden, I just took a liking to basketball a little bit, and I enjoyed it. And then I got at a higher level where it got more competitive. And then I started thinking this is something I might want to do the rest of my life.
Well, okay, so your first job as a varsity head girls basketball coach, was that at Roswell or somewhere else before Roswell?
It was at Roswell.
At Roswell, okay. And you said you spent 16
years in Roswell.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about briefly. You had a really good thing going at Roswell. I think you coached Jaden Delacerda at Roswell, right?
Yes.
Who became a Lobo, a very good Lobo here in Albuquerque. You had a really good thing going at Roswell, and you had a state championship at Roswell, I think 2016.
Yes.
And then I think it was, I don't know if it was the next season or the season after that, that you left Roswell and went to Hobbs. And you and I have talked about this, in other ways, but I'd like you to tell me again here on the podcast, the lure of going to Hobbs. Of course, Roswell and Hobbs are not in the same classification, which of course is the biggest attraction, I would imagine, not to mention the fact that, as you said, you'd already spent some time in Hobbs as a coach. So you knew the community, you knew the school, you knew how important basketball was. So let's start there. You had the opportunity to go to Hobbs, even though you had a great thing going at Roswell.
Yeah, that kind of fell in my lap. I didn't think Hobbs wanted me, and honestly, I didn't want Hobbs. We were the number one team in the state coming back from Roswell. We had 4 seniors, 4 juniors, 4 sophomores, and like 2 freshmen on our roster. We were going to be preseason number 1 ranked the very next year. And then I knew Coach Casaus personally, and he said, I'm getting out. And I said, oh, man. So I started talking to my assistant coach, which is Chanel Scott. And I said, kid, I'm going to tell you this right now. If you get a chance to get that job, why don't you go for it? It's a very multicultural town. Everyone loves everyone. They support basketball. I think it'd be a good job for you. The very next morning, I get the call from Hobbs, and I just was like, you're offering me the job, or you're interested in me coming over? And he's like, yeah. And
you had just won state.
We just won state.
Right.
And I had no plans of leaving. I was going to retire in Roswell, making this much money. So that was my plan. And then I just looked at my wife and I said, hey, you want to go back home? And of course she's like, heck yeah, I want to go back home. She wanted to go back to Hobbs. We didn't want to leave Hobbs. I was too inexperienced to get the head job, and probably rightly so. I mean, the guy that got it over me had 18 years experience. I know this is publicly, I just felt like it could have been handled different. And it just wasn't handled the way I thought it should have been handled. That's why I left.
Right.
But I still have family, friends, loved ones all over Hobbs. And when I came back, they had open arms for me, and I'm just thankful for that.
So your first season in Hobbs would have been the 2016-17 season.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the only year that you've been at Hobbs that you have not made the finals. And I guess I'm wondering, as you came in and you evaluated the personnel and the kids that you had, what did you see? Because we're at a point where, Hobbs is, as we talked about at the start, 6 state championship games in a row. We really haven't seen a run like this. And of course, Volcano has been in the last 4 with you. We haven't seen any team other than Don Flanagan's El Dorado Eagles really go on a sustained run like this where you're in the final for 6 years in a row. Don used to get there regularly, of course, and, El Dorado had this unbelievable program. But when you got to Hobbs, what did you see? And did you see a base that convinced you that this type of run was doable and or possible?
Well, I'll answer that in a second, but I'm very impressed with your knowledge on stats and your understanding of the game. Because, no one's ever mentioned the fact that we tied Coach Flanagan with 6 in a row, and we're going for number 7 this year to break the all-time record for big schools.
Right.
Now, it happens quite often in small schools.
Yeah.
But I was very impressed with the fact that you knew that, and I'm very aware of it. I just kind of kept that in my hip pocket. I'm impressed, James. But, no, when we came to Hobbs, and we're sitting there in Hobbs, and we rolled out the balls the first day, and I say we because I also brought my assistant coach along with me, Chanel Scott, and we rolled them out, and we just started playing basketball. And I just looked at her, and she looked at me, and I said, oh, my goodness. Because we inherited a 12-14 team. So we thought...
Now, when you say, oh, my goodness, like, wow, there's a good foundation here, or, oh, my goodness, we've got some work to do.
Okay, good question. So I would say more like, oh, my goodness, we get a Jaden Delacerda in Roswell once every 4, 5, 6 years. A kid that could possibly play, one kid that could possibly play next level basketball. When I went to Hobbs and rolled out those basketballs that first year, I saw at least 5 kids that could play next level basketball.
Really? These kids were all on the varsity from the previous season?
Yeah, okay. And I didn't have them it was amazing. So right away, my job was easy. And then we just went and won 18 games in a row. We were 18-0 to start the first season. We actually beat La Cueva that year by 35 points and then lost to them up here at the Santa Ana Star Center in a Final Four game by 2 points. So, we almost played for the state championship all in the first year.
Right.
And it was all because we had talented kids, and we just put them in a system, and they just believed in it and believed in us. And I don't know, we just had success. I was a guy that came in at the right time, I guess. They just wanted a new voice. They just wanted something new, and I just happened to be that huckleberry,
Describe to me your philosophy about what makes a great basketball program. What are the ingredients that you look for and want to instill that make all the pieces come together as they have these last, half dozen years?
Well, if you expect your team to be consistent, then you need to be consistent. And so that means consistent discipline, consistent coaching, consistent everything, how you treat your players from number 12 to number 1. You have to also have very good assistant coaches that are willing to, how do you say this? They're willing to do whatever it takes and put in the time that it takes, and so far I've been blessed in Hobbs that all of my assistant coaches all summer, they're all committed. And so we have that good structure going on. And you got to have some good kids that are willing to work hard and do all the good things that it takes to become a very good team.
I want to ask a tough question. Okay. More and more, and I see this in Albuquerque all the time, and I'm wondering if it holds true for Hobbs or any other cities outside the metro area. More and more, I'm seeing kids, especially on the girls' side, becoming single sport athletes. And they go pretty much year round, whether it's volleyball or softball or basketball, whatever their sport is. Does this hold true for Hobbs girls basketball? Do you have kids? I don't know if any of these kids are excel in track or volleyball or soccer, or mostly these kids just basketball committed.
Well, that's a good question, because when I first came to Hobbs, I sit around a round table of coaches. It's real funny, and I'm not going to mention any names, but some Hall of Famers, some good coaches, but we get beat out of the state tournament. And sometimes us, old timers will get together and we'll sit around a round table. Do you let your kids play volleyball? Yes, 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 yes. All of them say yes. And I said, okay, here's the proof in the pudding. How many of your kids play volleyball? Oh, well, this year we got 1. Whoa, we got 1. We got 2. Coach Carpenter, how many do you have that play volleyball? I had 6. That's just varsity. I had 4 JVers. You know what I mean? So we allow the kids to. So here's the problem. We played a Lubbock Monterey team, right, with the number 1 guard in the country, in Aaliyah Chavez.
And they had already played, I think, a bunch of games even before you played them, right?
They played 11 games.
Yeah,
we were in a lose-lose situation.
Right.
But I'm not going to use that as an excuse. We still have high expectations in Hobbs and for our kids. We had 4 practices. We had kids just coming out of cross-country, kids just coming out of volleyball. We had 4 legit practices together, and they weren't in preseason with us. But they don't hand out blue trophies in November and December. And if coaches would realize that and let these kids play, and in my kids' defense, they'd be sick of me if they went year-round with me. They'd be sick of me. So I'm glad they kind of get out of the gym and do something else.
I have to admit, this is a pet peeve of mine from doing this job so long. I do not like coaches who put sort of passive-aggressive restrictions on their athletes and say, well, you can do this sport, but you're going to limit your opportunities in this program if you go do this, if you go play softball, if you go play soccer, if you run track and field, whatever your sport is. They'll very subtly let them know, well, yeah, if you want to do it, I can't stop you, but, you're going to fall behind with us. And I've never liked that. I don't like it. I think multi-sport athletes end up being better students, first of all. And I just think they get more out of the high school experience. It's high school. We're not under, they're not being paid for their time like some of the college athletes now. Yeah. Let them do what they want to do. And we have, believe me, I've encountered these coaches. We have some coaches, not all, but some coaches who just want year-round participation in their sport to build their program. And yeah, philosophically, as you just said, it can vary from coach to coach, from gender to gender, and I always find it interesting. But I like coaches who say, "Yeah, I want you doing multiple sports." I find often with football coaches, they love their kids to do track and field. They find that is a real enhancement for them by the time they come back out for football. Yeah, and if they miss some time during the spring, it's okay. They're still in the weight room. That's okay. They're not gonna fall so far behind that they can't contribute. So I'm with you. I like coaches that will allow their kids to branch out if they want to be a 2-sport athlete, a 3-sport athlete. Some kids are even 4-sport athletes. Let them. It's high school. Let them do what they want to do and enjoy their experience. If they're a good enough athlete, they'll still contribute to your program. So I'm with you. I like that, and I'm glad to hear a coach say that out loud, because not enough of them, I think, will say that out loud.
Well, I think you catch coaches talking out of both sides of their mouth. It's like when I ask them, do you let it? Yes, 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 but I only have one. Then you don't let them. Then you're pressuring them. You can say what you want. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying.
I get you. Yeah. And you know what? Like I said, and one of the things I think that's proven is kids are better students when they're more actively involved in athletics, whether it's one sport or 3 or 2, whatever.
Yes.
They're just better students. They're more actively engaged, and I've just always believed in that. So we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. I have some individual questions I wanted to fire away at you.
Okay.
If you took Tasker Arena out of the equation, what is the toughest gym to play in, girls basketball-wise?
Man.
I would say Gallup or maybe Kirtland or something, but I don't know if you've ever played in either one of those gyms.
Oh, yeah, because remember, I coach in Roswell.
Yeah.
So, Gallup's definitely pretty high on the list.
Is there one venue? Is there one venue you think, we're going to this gym, I'm excited, because it's such an intimidating place to play, like Tasker Arena can be?
Yeah, I can give you one arena that's, and no one can argue it. It starts with a P and ends with a T. It's called the Pit. Oh, man, I live for that moment, and I love going there, and it isn't intimidating. And I know it's not a gymnasium, but as far as high school gyms, you got to have Gallup up there. You got to have Espanola up there. It's a great environment to be a part of. And there's a couple other places that would probably be on my list, but I don't think I'll tell you, that Farmington area is really good. When their teams are really good, their fans support them, and sometimes they're sold out up there. As far as Albuquerque, it's a hit and miss thing.
Extremely hit and miss.
It is hit and miss, and it's no disrespect to them, and I'm not bagging on anybody.
No, you don't have to with me. I see this all the time covering games here. Fans just don't show up. I think of the old Kirtland Shiprock days when those teams would play 5-6 times a year, and then they'd come down here and play in the Pit, and you just could not get a seat in the Pit unless you showed up like 7 hours early.
Right.
And you had to sit through other games. Right. I miss those days. Those are some of the most exciting days I've ever seen with the Journal, were those days when Kirtland and Shiprock were dominating, and they'd come down and play in a championship game, and both communities would just fill the Pit, and other Native American communities as well. Not necessarily from those 2 towns. It could be from Santa Fe or Espanola or Gallup. They were actively interested in this too. I always loved that about the girls basketball side of it.
Yeah, and Kirtland's got a pretty good crowd too. They have quite a bit over there. Aztec had a good crowd when I've been in there and played and scouted before, and there's some good arenas.
The coach who consistently gives you the toughest time is who?
The toughest time.
Whose teams are always just so well prepared schematically that you always find they just give you a headache by the end of the night.
Well, the obvious answer, if you want to go obviously over the last 6 years, I would say Lisa Villarreal. But if you're going to say over Joe Carpenter's career, I would probably say George Maya or Johnny Casals.
I love George.
And I love Johnny.
Yeah.
I mean, they both of them are really good coaches, but that's over 20-something years. I will tell you this, the district we were in, when we were in the Las Cruces district, which was crazy. I mean, you might play a Tuesday game against John Zumbrin, who's a very good coach in Carlsbad.
I know John very well.
Then on Friday, you get Matt Abney. Then on Tuesday, you get George Maya. Then you get Lori Selby. It just got difficult. It was like you're coaching against great coaches every single night. That was a tough district. I'll just tell you that.
Yeah. Shot clock. Let's talk about it. From everything I've been told, coaches in the larger classifications, generally speaking, prefer a shot clock. Mm-hmm. Coaches in the smaller classifications do not. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into this, including the finances involved in putting in a shot clock. As a matter of fact, I'm almost positive that Tasker Arena is the only high school arena in the state that has a shot clock, and I think that's because the UNM men played a exhibition game there a few years ago, and it was mandatory that a shot clock exists. Am I not correct about this?
No, you're 100% correct.
Right. So, where do you come out on this? Shot clock, do we need one in New Mexico or not?
Well, I think if you're trying to prepare kids for the next level, which I think that's what we're all trying to do, I think it's a necessity. Because coaches want to see what kids do under the shot clock and play faster, because in different situations, that way they know what kind of kid they're getting at the next level. There's a lot of NIL money. There's a lot of things that are factors nowadays. And so they want to invest in certain kids. And I don't think playing stall ball, 40-38 final score or 38-32 final score shows all that, and I think they want it.
I would say this just as a quick counterpoint. I see games like this, like you just referred to, but sometimes this is just because teams are just not playing very well. It's not that they're taking time beyond what the shot clock would be. They're just missing a lot of shots, and they maybe are just not good shooters. I see enough games like that to go along with what you just said, with teams that slow it down and they'll do 35, 40-second possessions. I do see that, but I also see a lot of low-scoring games, and sometimes when I cover one, people will come at me on my social media account, see, we need a shot clock. They weren't actually at the game, and it would, sometimes it's just a sloppily played game that just had a lot of fouls and a lot of missed shots, and it was just not very aesthetically pleasant. This is sort of the problem I have here. I get what you're saying. I'm opposed. I'll say this. I'm opposed to the shot clock. I like New Mexico basketball the way it is. I'm not saying a shot clock would not improve the product long term. Of course, it would require a few years for everybody to adjust, but I like New Mexico basketball the way it is. Yeah,
I mean, and that's okay. I mean, people like Tasker Arena the way it is. That's why we don't have a big arena in Hobbs. They want it to be the way it is and the way it was. And I get it. And it probably is the best thing for an underdog. You might have some upsets if a guy can hold the ball at half court and put it under his arm and spread the floor. I get that. And so you're going to get some of that old school. I just think you got to understand, we just adopted a racing space a lot more, so we want to play fast.
Yeah.
So the shot clock wouldn't even affect us now.
Right. And for a lot of larger schools, see, this is another area. A lot of the larger school coaches seem to like this idea, and I'm thinking, I watch a lot of these teams, and I don't see them holding the ball for lengthy times without shooting. They're getting shots off within 15 to 25 seconds. So I'm always curious as to why they believe this when they don't really have a team that would benefit or be penalized either way.
Well, I think the number one thing is there's strategy still involved, but you have seen this 10, 9, 8, and all of a sudden the kid jacks it up. They don't understand time and situations at all. So and so I think it makes you even more aware as a player, and I think that's something the next level guys want to see. And
we may be heading there. I don't know. I know the NMAA has had 2 people on the floor. They sit right in front of me on press row. The last couple of seasons, they've had 2 gentlemen sitting there timing possessions. Girls' games, boys' games, didn't matter. And I believe from what Zach Stevenson said, he's the commissioner of officials now, for the NMAA, it was such a small percentage, like 2% of all the possessions were actually going over the time where a shot clock would be, needed. And so I think the NMAA feels, and of course, finances are a big thing. For some of the small schools, this would be a financial burden for them. But the NMAA has been having people timing possessions. Now, this is only at the pit, so this is a small sample size. I mean, there are thousands of games that are played around the state. This is only for the games in the pit for those 5 days, Tuesday through Saturday. So it's a small sample size. But, it could be someday it's coming. A lot of people believe it should be here already, and maybe someday it will. I'm not sure. I just was curious to get what your opinion was. And I'll give you a quick anecdote. This is one of my favorite stories ever at the Journal. So during Flanagan's peak at El Dorado, one year they played Albuquerque High in the state championship game. Albuquerque High was coached by a guy named Greg Papp, who I like very much. I still see Greg around from time to time. Albuquerque High was completely outmatched. There was no way they could run the floor for 32 minutes with El Dorado without getting beaten by 50.
Right.
So, and imagine, and you can, what I'm about to describe, imagine if this played out now. Albuquerque High quite literally put the ball on their hip for 3 quarters. They just stood out there. El Dorado stood there. The clock's running. Fans are booing. And Albuquerque High just literally just stood there and just would not shoot it for 3 quarters. They did not want to give El Dorado any possessions. I can't remember what the score was by the end of the third quarter. It was, 8-2, 10-2, something like that. It was really stupid looking. And it was it was the most bizarre thing you've ever seen in your life. This would have been mid-90s maybe. The final score of the game ended up being 23-5.
Okay.
So, later on, after the game, of course, I'm asking Coach Papp about this, and he said, look, I cannot beat El Dorado for 32 minutes. I maybe can beat them for 8 minutes. Maybe I can get lucky and outplay them for 8 minutes, hit a couple of 3-pointers unexpectedly. I wanted to give my girls the best chance they had to win a state title, and to do that, I had to put the ball on our hip for 3 quarters. It was extremely unpopular, but speaking to what you were just saying, strategy. Albuquerque High, no way they can play with. If they play with El Dorado up and down the floor, it's a massacre, and nobody has any fun. So I always remember that game because it was just so bizarre looking. Because we're all just sitting there on press row, and if we had cell phones to text, we would have been doing that. We were all just sitting here looking at each other, and hey, we should go get a sandwich. We got time. They're not going to be shooting it. It was a very strange thing. So I sometimes I think, what if that game played out in the pit in the year 2023 or 24, and how people would react. In this day of social media. There was no social media back then. How would people react to a game like that in this day and era?
Oh, you love drama, don't you?
That would be fun.
No, but there's also strategy, and you also want your kids to get rewarded when they play defense for 30 seconds or so, and they get after you for 30 seconds, and I don't think that's always the case,
right.
So it's a double-edged sword. It just depends on how you want to look at it.
Yeah, it's one of those topics I think you could sit down with 100 people and find 50 that like it, 50 that don't, and just let them go at each other and talk about it. And someday I think I want to do that for a story for the Journal, and just get maybe half a dozen coaches on one side, half a dozen on the other, and just get them in a room and just let them talk about it. And I'll just sit there and observe. We're not there yet, but I'd like to do that someday.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Anyway, so Joe, we're going to cut you loose.
Okay.
I thank you so much for coming in to visit with me. It was a great chat. Good luck tonight against Cleveland. I'm going to be at the girls' semifinals on Friday at Highland, so I don't mean any offense to Susan Kabbalah at Cleveland, but I fully expect to see you there. As we talk today, the other girls' semifinals are La Cueva and El Dorado, Sandia and Rio Rancho. And those two, Sandia and Rio Rancho, played at the Rio Rancho tournament several weeks ago. I was at that game. That game was, I think, tied or within a point at halftime. Rio Rancho impressed me. They've got some good young kids that can play. They got some kids, I think, that transferred in from West Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. Rio Rancho's not bad.
They're very well coached.
Right.
Too.
And then we've got, which I think is the most intriguing game tonight by far, which is Volcano Vista against Gallup. That game's out at Atrisco Heritage. So those are the quarterfinals tonight. Of course, by the time you all see this, it will already be Thursday. But so we're going to have some interesting semifinals, however it shakes out. So I am expecting to see you on Friday at Highland. But we thank Joe Carpenter, the head girls basketball coach at Hobbs High School. Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you for making the time. And I will see you, I believe, in a couple of days.
James, I appreciate you having me on, and Thank you very much.
No, Joe, my pleasure. So that's it. There's no wrap up segment today. We're just gonna head on out. You can find my podcasts on abqjournal.com or on YouTube. Same with Jeff Grammer's Lobo Men's Basketball podcast. You can find them there. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you can find me on social media at James D. Yodice. That site also has my email address, jyodice@abqjournal.com. I always welcome the feedback. And in the meantime, we always encourage you to read, hear, watch. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk next week.